Is your HOA always this fair? The yellow toe notice slapped against my trailer with a paper slap the moment I stepped onto the driveway porch glare, catching Paula's smile like she owned the whole coast. They tried towing my beach house gear off my deeded strip policy, she said, and the tow truck beeped like it was counting down to some payday that wasn't theirs. But then my attorney dropped a lawsuit binder on the counter paper stamp, and the red tape glow shifted fast when the court froze their accounts. Anyway, next week, the clubhouse door stayed shut, and nobody argued why. The Saturday of Memorial Day weekend, I pushed open the screen door with my shoulder coffee mug in one hand, bare feet on cool deck boards. The air smelled like salt and outboard fuel, the kind of morning I usually lived for. Then I saw the yellow. A bright, sunburned rectangle of paper was flapping on the front of my trailer, taped right to the tongue. It stood out against the dull red frame and the silver winch cable like a warning flare. I walked down the steps, mug swinging at my side. The trailer sat where it always sat, nose pointed toward the street backed up along the fence. Skiff on top, kayak lashed to the side, folding chairs stacked in a milk crate, big blue cooler strapped near the axle, beach cart bungeed to the back. My whole beach house gear in one place. The notice snapped in the breeze. I set my mug on the fender and peeled the tape back. "Move immediately or towed it," said across the top in block letters. Underneath, smaller print issued under Seaside Dunes, HOA Authority. I felt my jaw clench. At the very bottom there was a line in fine print about unauthorized storage on association property and visual corridor obstruction. It wasn't association property. That strip of crushed shell and sand was in my deed from the street to the edge of my porch. I looked up the length of the driveway as if the asphalt might have slid 3 feet sideways overnight. Same old crack by the mailbox, same ruts where the trailer tires had dug in over the years. "This is my line," I muttered, "not theirs." I folded the notice once, then again, careful not to tear it. Whoever thought this was a good idea had gone out of their way to make it look official. Yellow stock, bold, font, little HOA logo in the corner. Somebody wanted it to sting. I finished my coffee in 2 swallows, went back inside and pulled the fireproof box from under the bed. The hinges squeaked as I flipped it open. Closing, packet, tax bills. Insurance. I dug until I found the photocopy of my deed, the one stamped in blue, received, county register, 2017. I traced the boundary line with my thumb. Street, driveway, house. The strip where my trailer sat was shaded with a light gray marker I'd added myself that first year just to be sure. I slipped the deed copy and the notice into a manila folder, grabbed my keys, and headed for the truck. The HOA office sat just inside the main gate to Seaside Dunes, tucked between the guard kiosk and the little fitness room they built to justify another line item on dues. The guard lifted the barrier when he saw my truck, half a nod, half a wince. My reputation traveled faster than my tires. Parking lot asphalt radiated heat even this early. I stepped inside and a cheap door chime dinged overhead. Fluorescent lights hummed. A single desk, a couple of gray chairs framed photos of community improvements on the walls. The clerk at the desk looked up from her keyboard. She wore readers on a beaded chain and the expression of someone who'd opened too many complaint emails. "Morning," she said. I held up the yellow paper. "Got this on my trailer." Her gaze flicked to it and back to her screen. "If it was on your trailer, sir, it was likely issued for a reason." "Yeah," I said. "I'd like to hear it from whoever signed off." The inner door opened with a soft click, and Paula Green walked out like she'd been waiting for her cue. Mid-50s, same as me, but polished hair sprayed into place, blouse without a wrinkle, smile like it came on with a switch. "Mr. Boyd," she said. "Good morning." Didn't realize you kept track of my weekends, I replied. She glanced at the notice in my hand. We keep track of the community. The Memorial Weekend Enforcement Program started today. Your Odge trailer was on the list. It's not just a trailer, I said. It's where I keep my beach house gear, on my land. Her eyes slid past me toward the parking lot window like she could see the trailer from there. It's parked directly in the visual corridor leading into Seaside Dunes, she said. It ruins the coastal aesthetic we're trying to maintain. I set the folder on her counter and slid it toward her. This is my deed, I said. Strip from the street to the porch is mine. That includes the spot where my trailer and gear sit. I'm not blocking your road. I'm not on your common area. She put a manicured hand on the folder but didn't open it. Our bylaws are very clear about stored equipment visible from the street, she said. Boats, trailers, recreational gear. On association property, I cut in. You don't own my driveway. The clerk shifted in her chair. Paula didn't blink. If it's visible from the road, it's under association review, she said. That's our policy. And the county says this piece of ground belongs to me, I answered. So, which policy wins? Her smile thinned. She lifted her hand off the folder like it might bite. I'm not going to debate land records in the lobby, she said. If you believe the notice was issued in error, you can request a hearing in writing. In the meantime, the trailer needs to be moved off-site. There's a storage lot outside town. I took a slow breath, counting to 3. Ma'am, I said quietly, that's my beach house gear, on my land. Not for long if you ignore the notice, Paula replied. Towing begins Monday. No exceptions. We held each other's stare a beat too long for it to be neighborly. I picked up the folder, slipped the yellow notice back inside, and turned toward the door. The chime dinged again as I stepped out. Heat hit my face sharper now. Behind me, I heard the clerk's chair creak. Her voice dropped, but the lobby was small and sound carried. You're not the only one they tagged this weekend, she whispered. I didn't turn around. I just tightened my grip on the folder and headed for the truck, feeling that single yellow sheet of paper like it weighed 100 pounds. The Seagull Diner sat just off Harbor Key Road, wedged between a tackle shop and a souvenir place that still sold seashell lamps. By late morning, the line at the counter was already thick. Fishermen in ball caps, retirees in windbreakers. A couple of sunburned tourists who'd misjudged yesterday's UV index. When I stepped inside, the smell of bacon and old coffee hit me like a familiar handshake. And then I saw them 3 people sitting at different tables, each holding a bright yellow tow notice, just like mine. One guy in a faded Coast Guard hoodie was squinting at his as if it might rearrange itself into something friendlier. A younger woman near the window kept flipping hers over and over. Melissa from down the street was standing at the register arguing with the waitress about whether an HOA could legally label a kayak rack abandoned equipment. I slid into a booth still holding my folder from the HOA office. Frank, broad-shouldered, gray-beard, favorite stool by the coffee pots, caught my eye and walked over with a refilled mug. You got tagged too, huh? He said, nodding at the edge of yellow sticking out of my folder. I pulled the notice free and unfolded it on the table. Found it taped to the tongue of my trailer this morning. He whistled, long and low. They're doing a Memorial Weekend sweep. Started at sunrise. Got half the neighborhood before breakfast. Why I asked. Frank leaned one hand on the table and lowered his voice. Heard they're trying to raise revenue. They voted down that increase last fall, remember? So now they're aiming for towing fees. Fund repairs is what they're calling it. I rubbed my forehead. This was on my land, Frank. Doesn't matter to them, he said. If they want to call it a corridor violation, they will. Paula's on a tear this season. Behind him, Melissa held up her notice to 2 other diners. Look, same signature, same timestamp. They hit us all within 10 minutes. The waitress turned the TV up a notch. Local news was running a piece on rising coastal enforcement complaints. Perfect background music for the morning I was having. I dug out my phone and scrolled through contacts until I found Jordan Hale, former JAG officer, now a sharp civil attorney with more patience than he liked to admit. I hit call. He answered on the second ring. Cal. Everything all right? No, I said. HOA stuck a tow notice on my trailer, all my beach house gear, on my deeded strip. Describe the notice. I did, word for word. Frank shifted his weight and pretended he wasn't listening. And the location is where you always park, Jordan asked. Same place since 17. I've got the deed copy with me, and a certified letter they sent back in 2018 about something else. Good, he said. Send me scans of the deed, the notice, and that letter. All of it. I pulled the deed copy from my folder, running a thumb along the stamped header again. I can take pictures right now. Make them clear, he said. Front and back. Get the parcel line. That strip is yours, Cal. If that's your deeded property, they can't tow your beach house gear. Period. My stomach eased a fraction. In the background, I heard him typing. Frank slid into the booth across from me. He sounds calm. That's good. I shrugged. He doesn't get rattled easily. Melissa walked by our booth and slapped her notice onto the counter. Tell your lawyer they've lost their minds, she said, half laughing, half out of breath. It's like they're hungry for tickets. Jordan spoke again. Cal, this feels like more than a random sweep. 3 clients from the same HOA, same weekend, that's a pattern. Could be revenue-based. That's what people here are saying. Send everything he repeated. Tonight. The sooner I see the documents, the sooner I know what angle they're playing. Frank tapped the notice with a thick finger. They're definitely playing something. Jordan must have heard the noise. Was that Frank? Yeah, I said. He got one too. Then we're not dealing with a single mistake, Jordan said. If they tried to tow your beach house gear, Cal, we may have leverage. The words settled in like a sudden shift in tide. Leverage, I asked. Depending on the bylaws, he said, yes, and depending on what they knew when they issued those notices. I exhaled slowly, watching steam rise from my coffee. Frank mouthed the word leverage like it tasted better than the bacon he'd been eating. A server dropped the check on the table along with the kind of look you give someone who's about to have a very long weekend. Jordan's voice softened. Send me everything. Tonight. We may need to move fast. The call ended. Outside the diner windows, the coastal wind pushed a row of palms' sideways leaves rattling like they had something urgent to tell the whole town. I folded the tow notice back into my folder. 3 more yellow sheets glowed across the diner, all the same color as the one burning a hole in my pocket. By the time I clocked out at the harbor that afternoon, the tide had dropped and the whole marina smelled like fuel salt and sunburned rope. I drove home with the windows down, letting the wind cut through the heat that had been sticking to me since lunch. It should have been an easy evening wash-up, maybe fix the loose hinge on the deck box, crack open a cold beer while the gulls screamed at each other. But halfway down my street, something felt wrong. A white tow truck was sitting square in my driveway, angled idling strobes blinking even in daylight. Its rear wheels were deep in the crushed shell, and the boom arm was already raised. The steel cable stretched tight from the winch drum straight to the tongue of my trailer, the one holding everything I used at the beach. My skiff, kayak, folding Adirondacks, coolers, beach cart, all of it. My brakes squealed as I slammed the truck into park. The operator had already lifted the trailer a foot off the ground. The skiff rocked bunks creaking. A ratchet strap groaned in protest. He kept his thumb on the winch toggle like he was scared of losing momentum. Melissa was on her porch across the street, waving both arms over her head. Her phone was pressed to her ear. "He's towing the wrong guy's stuff," she shouted to whoever was on the line. Yes, the wrong guy. I marched down the driveway, gravel popping under my boots. "Hey," I yelled. "Disconnect it. Right now." The tow operator, mid-40s, sweat running into his collar, glanced past me toward the woman standing near the front of the wrecker. Paula Green, HOA president. Same expression she wore in every meeting I'd ever seen her run, polite, polished, and absolutely sure she was the smartest one in the room. "Mr. Boyd," she called out, "you ignored the tow notice. We're enforcing association policy." "You're enforcing it on my land," I snapped. "That strip is in my deed." She gave a practiced smile. "Your equipment is visible from the main road. Under our visual standards, it qualifies as a nuisance. We posted proper notice." The winch tightened again. My trailer jerked higher another inch, maybe two. One of the straps slipped half an inch across the metal and screeched. I held up a hand. "Drop it. Now." The operator hesitated. "Ma'am, he's saying you're contracted by the association." Paula cut in sharply. "Finish the removal." Melissa's voice carried across the street. "Deputy Lawson is on his way." "Cal, I told him the whole thing." I pulled out my phone and hit Jordan's contact. He picked up immediately. "What's happening?" he asked. "They're towing my beach house gear out of my driveway. Cable is on it right now. Put me on speaker." I held the phone in the air. "This is Attorney Jordan Hale," he said. "Before your contractor moves that trailer another inch, I need you." His voice sharpened to state what document gives the HOA ownership or towing authority over that strip of land. Paula stiffened. "This isn't a deposition, counselor." "Then stop acting like you're in one," he replied. "Show any recorded document, deed, plat, easement that identifies this as HOA property." The tow operator turned pale. He glanced at the cable, then at Paula, then at me, like he'd been tricked into starting a fight he definitely didn't want. Before anyone spoke, blue lights flashed at the end of the street. Deputy Lawson pulled up radio, crackling on his shoulder sunglasses still on, even though the sun was fading. He stepped out, took one long look at the raised trailer, and made a sound somewhere between a sigh and a growl. "Evening," he said. "Somebody, tell me why this is already in the air." Paula straightened like she'd been waiting for her cue. "Deputy, we're conducting a lawful enforcement action. The trailer violates." Lawson raised a hand. "I asked why it's in the air, not about violations." I pointed at the trailer. "They hooked up without proof of authority. Tow notice was taped on this morning." I didn't even have time to respond. Jordan spoke through the phone again. "Deputy, I've reviewed the deed. The strip is unquestionably Mr. Boyd's property. There's nothing in the county record that gives the association towing authority over it." Lawson's jaw moved once as he chewed on that. Then he turned to Paula. "You got paperwork saying this strip belongs to the HOA, or that you have a towing easement, anything recorded?" She looked toward the tow operator like he might magically have a file folder tucked under the wrecker. "We can provide that later," she said. "The association acted in good faith." "That's not what I asked," Lawson replied. "Right now, you're touching private property without proof." He nodded to the operator. "Drop it. Slow." The man didn't argue. He flipped the toggle and the trailer groaned as it settled back onto the crushed shell. One of the straps snapped with a loud crack. A fresh, ugly scrape ran along the frame where the cable had bitten into metal. My stomach twisted. Not catastrophic damage, but damage I'd done nothing to earn. Paula's face flushed. "We can still cite you. Visibility counts." "Visibility isn't ownership," I said. Lawson looked at me hard, then at her. "You better document everything he said quietly. Something smells off." Miguel picked the kind of meeting spot that said he didn't want to be seen talking to me. The parking lot behind the Seagull Diner was half lit by a single sodium lamp that buzzed like it had a bee trapped inside. The ocean wind funneled between the buildings, carrying the smell of fry oil and salt. My truck was the only vehicle back there until a faded silver sedan eased in and parked 2 spaces over engine ticking as it cooled. Miguel climbed out looking smaller out of his HOA polo. He'd traded it for a plain gray hoodie and a ball cap that had seen better days. He clutched a thick manila folder to his chest like he thought someone might run up and yank it away. "Cal," he said, giving a nervous nod. "Miguel," I replied. "You said it was important." He glanced around the lot. The back door of the diner swung open for a second, spilling yellow light and the clatter of dishes, then thumped shut again. We were alone. "It is," he said. I shouldn't have this, but after what they did with the tow truck." He held the folder out. I took it, feeling the weight. It wasn't just paper weight. It was the kind that came from signatures and timestamps and all the little lines that could ruin someone's week. "What am I looking at?" I asked. He rubbed the back of his neck. "Copies. I pulled them before Paula pushed me out. She doesn't know I kept them. I thought I could just walk away, but when I saw that truck in your driveway—" His voice trailed off. I flipped the folder open under the buzzing light. The first set of pages were towing logs. Printed spreadsheets, columns of addresses, dates, violation codes, fees. Next to a handful of entries, someone had drawn little red circles with a highlighter. My address was circled 3 times. "They marked you as priority after you complained about the gate cameras last year," Miguel said quietly. "Problem trailers, that's what they started calling them." I flipped the page and the air seemed to cool a few degrees. It wasn't just me. There were other names I recognized from the diner, from the marina, from school events. Each circled. "What's this column?" I asked, pointing. "Projected revenue," he said. Paula had me start tracking it. Fines, towing fees, admin charges. She wanted to show the board how enforcement could pay for itself. He pulled a single sheet from the back of the stack with careful fingers and handed it to me. It was a printed email header still attached. From Paula Green. To board at Seaside Dunes. Subject line: Memorial Weekend Enforcement. Halfway down, a sentence was highlighted in neon yellow. "Turn violations into revenue this Memorial Weekend." Below that, in the same paragraph, "Focus on problem trailers. They're low-hanging fruit." My name was handwritten in the margin with an arrow pointing at the phrase. I exhaled slowly. The wind tugged at the edges of the pages. "So it wasn't about safety," I said. Miguel shook his head. She kept saying, "appearance and community values." But every meeting was about numbers. How much we could bring in, how much we could offset. I asked. He gave a humorless laugh. Used to be we. Now she calls me that disgruntled former employee whenever someone asks why I'm gone. A car passed on the street out front, headlights sweeping briefly across the edge of the lot, then fading. I tucked the email behind the logs and found a smaller stack of papers at the back: plat maps, parcel outlines, zoomed-in sections with lot numbers and easements. "You pulled land records too," I said. "Yeah," he answered. "Your property, the strip they tried to tow from the common areas. I wanted to be sure you weren't crazy when you kept saying, 'It's my land.'" I folded the folder shut. "You're sure Paula doesn't know you copied these?" "If she knew, he said my car would have been gone from this lot before you got here." He looked toward the shadowed side of the diner, then back at me. "Take it to your attorney," he said. "Please, before she buries this stuff under some new policy." I nodded. "Thanks, Miguel." He shoved his hands into his hoodie pockets. "I don't need thanks. I need someone to stop her before she does this to the next guy." He got in his sedan and drove off without another word, taillights disappearing into the traffic on Harbor Key Road. I carried the folder like live ammunition. Jordan's office sat above a printing shop near the courthouse. The stairwell smelled like toner and old coffee. He opened the door before I could knock twice, sleeves rolled up, tie loosened. "You look like you brought me trouble," he said. "I brought you proof," I replied. We sat at his conference table, the folder between us. I spread out the tow logs first, then the email, then the plat maps. Jordan's face didn't change much, but the way his eyes narrowed told me enough. He tapped the highlighted line with one finger. "Turn violations into revenue this Memorial weekend." That's pretty on the nose, and here I said, sliding the logs closer, "Look at the circles." He scanned the columns. Same weekend, same violation codes, same problem trailer note. He glanced up. "They really wrote that. That's Miguel's term for it," I said. "But it matches what Paula called us in meetings." He leaned back, then reached for the plat maps. I watched his eyes flick between the lines, the numbers, the legend in the corner. "That strip," he said, tracing a boundary with his thumb, "is yours. There's no common area shading, no easement notation. Nothing." "You're reading it right," I said. He looked up. "You sound very sure." "I built half these kinds of maps in another life," I said. "Navy Seabees. We spent more time arguing over where lines went in the sand than you'd believe. Airfields, roads, temporary easements. You learn to read plats fast, or someone builds a fence in the wrong country." Jordan's mouth twitched. "You could have led with that the first time you called." "You didn't ask," I said. He turned back to the email, then to the logs again. His fingers drummed lightly on the table. "This isn't just towing," he said finally. "This is monetizing enforcement. They turned violation codes into a line item. They touched my beach house gear to do it," I said. He nodded once, sharp. "If they touched your beach house gear, we'll touch their money. Fair trade." He stood, went around to his desk, and woke up his laptop. The screen glowed reflection, catching his eyes. "I'm drafting a motion," he said. "They started it. We finish it properly." The next morning came in heavy and gray, the kind of coastal overcast that makes everything feel slower and more serious. I was standing in Jordan's office watching him print the last page of the complaint when the machine stamped the cover sheet with a hard mechanical thud. A red seal flashed across the top, "Complaint and motion to seize HOA operating accounts. Filed 03:17 p.m. The sound echoed in the small room. Jordan slid the packet together with the precision of a man who knew when paper could make someone bleed. "This," he said, "tucking the motion into a binder is how we take the wind out of their sails." I followed him down the hall toward the elevator. "Walk me through it again." He hit the button for the ground floor. "Simple cause and effect," he said. "They tried towing your beach house gear off your deeded property. That's interference with personal property rights. So we asked the court to freeze the accounts they used to fund that tow operation." The elevator rattled its way down. "They wanted to make towing into revenue," he continued. "Fine. Now the revenue stops." Outside, the afternoon traffic hummed like a faraway engine. We crossed between cars heading toward the courthouse. Jordan carried the binder under one arm, his tie lifting in the gusts coming off the water. Inside the clerk's office, fluorescent lights flickered overhead. A woman behind the counter, early 50s green reading glasses, looked up from a stack of forms. "Afternoon," she said. "What have you got?" Jordan handed over the binder. "Complaint and motion. Relating to unauthorized towing property interference and financial misconduct by the Seaside Dunes HOA." She flipped the pages, nodding as her eyes skimmed each line. When she reached the highlighted towing logs, she paused. "This the same HOA that's been clogging our phones since Friday?" she asked. "Probably," Jordan replied. "This filing might clear things up." She gave a dry laugh, stamped the top page, and slid the binder back under the glass. "Filed," she said. "Judge Merritt's pulling afternoon reviews." We walked out into the hallway. The courthouse had that specific quiet, thick echoing smelling faintly of old air vents and polished floors. A banker in a navy suit waited on a bench nearby checking his phone. When he overheard Jordan mention HOA accounts, he stood. "Seaside Dunes?" he asked. Jordan nodded. "We're moving to seize operating funds tied to enforcement misconduct." The banker shifted his weight, tapping his own briefcase. "If that motion gets signed," he said, "their checks won't clear tomorrow. Landscaping patrol contractors, pool maintenance, everything goes into overdraft." I raised an eyebrow. "That fast court seizure goes straight to the bank's compliance system," he said. "One click from a judge and those accounts freeze like February pipes." He lowered his voice. "You must have really pissed them off." "Other way around," I said. Jordan checked his watch. "We've got a brief hearing before Merritt." We thanked the banker and headed for courtroom 2B. Inside the room was nearly empty, just a bailiff, the clerk, a couple law students pretending not to eavesdrop. Judge Merritt, tall and silver-haired with a face like carved stone, stepped up to the bench. "Motion calendar," he said. "Case of Boyd versus Seaside Dunes. Homeowners Association." Jordan rose. "Your Honor, this motion stems from unauthorized towing attempts conducted on my client's deeded property. We have towing logs showing targeted enforcement and internal emails describing a planned revenue sweep. We request immediate seizure of the HOA's operating accounts pending investigation." Merritt held out a hand. The clerk passed up the binder. He turned the pages slowly, eyes narrowing at certain lines. "The HOA attempted to tow equipment off your client's property?" he asked. "Yes, Your Honor," Jordan said. "A tow operator was on site with the trailer already in the air when Deputy Lawson intervened. The association lacked any deeded authority or recorded easement. Yet they continued to categorize such towing as projected revenue." I watched the judge reread the highlighted sentence on Paula's email. "Turn violations into revenue this Memorial weekend." His expression didn't change, but his jaw flexed slightly. He flipped to the next page. "This column here projected revenue per address." Jordan nodded. "Yes, Your Honor. They marked my client and several neighbors as priority, tracking expected income from towing and fines. And the bank?" the judge asked. A voice rose from the back. The banker from the hallway stepped forward. "Your Honor, I represent Atlantic Coastal Bank. If this seizure is approved, we can place a hold on the HOA's operating accounts within the hour. Funds will be inaccessible until this court releases them." The judge considered that thumb resting on the edge of the log sheet. I felt a slow pulse in my temple. Every second of silence stretched longer. Finally, Merritt closed the binder. "I'll review this afternoon," he said. "Both the complaint and the financial motion. If the evidence supports your claims, I'll take appropriate action." Jordan bowed his head slightly. "Thank you, Your Honor." We stepped back into the hallway. My shoulders felt lighter and heavier at the same time, a strange mix of vindication and anticipation. "That went better than I expected," I said. Jordan didn't smile often, but he let one corner of his mouth shift upward. "This is how we make them feel it," he said. "They touched your beach house gear. So now we touch the accounts they used to bully people." We walked toward the exit. The courthouse windows rattled as a gust of coastal wind slammed against them. A storm front was rolling in fast and low over the horizon. Back in Jordan's office, he pulled up a banking interface on his computer, the kind attorneys use when filing freeze notifications. A single line blinked on the screen: "Pending court seizure review." The cursor pulsed beside it, a quiet heartbeat in electric blue. Jordan leaned back in his chair. "They wanted a revenue weekend," he said. "But I think the weekend just changed." The HOA clubhouse always smelled like chlorine and dusty folding chairs, even though the pool sat outside behind a locked gate. Tonight, the smell was stronger, maybe because the room was packed shoulder to shoulder. An emergency meeting did that, pulled in everyone from retirees and windbreakers to beach renters still wearing flip-flops. A projector hummed at the front of the room, glow washing the wall in pale blue. The microphone on the table squeaked every time someone breathed near it. Paula stood behind the podium, hands gripping the edges like she was afraid the crowd might carry her away if she let go. "There are rumors circulating," she said. "I want to assure everyone that the association remains financially stable and fully capable of meeting all obligations." The treasurer, seated 2 chairs down, cleared his throat. He leaned toward her and whispered something, but the mic caught it anyway. "That vendor payment still isn't clearing." A murmur rippled across the room. Jordan sat next to me in the second-row suit jacket off tie loosened the picture of calm. Before the meeting started, he'd said quietly, "If the clerk emails me during this meeting, listen for the beep." I had been listening for it ever since. Paula tapped the mic. "We'll get to questions. First, I'd like to dispel the false narrative about towing enforcement. We follow procedures. We act within our rights." Frank, sitting in the back, snorted loud enough for half the room to hear. Jordan raised his hand. Paula hesitated. Ignoring him would have looked worse. "Yes, Mr. Hale." He stood. "My client, Mr. Boyd, was nearly subjected to an unauthorized tow from his deeded property. Several other residents received similar notices. We'd like to present some documentation so the community understands what's actually happening." Paula's voice tightened. "This is an HOA forum, not a legal hearing." A resident shouted, "Let him talk." Another added, "We want answers." Paula glanced towards the treasurer as if hoping he'd save her, but he looked more confused than supportive. "Proceed," she said finally. Jordan walked to the front, plugged a USB drive into the laptop, and the projector shifted to a spreadsheet filled with dates and addresses. Red circles marked several of them, including mine. "These," he said, pointing with a remote, "are towing logs from the past 2 weeks. You'll notice certain addresses were marked as high-priority enforcement targets. Residents with skiffs, trailers, or beach gear." He tapped the screen again. "Many of these homes aren't on HOA property, and yet the board tracked projected revenue from towing them." The treasurer leaned closer to the screen, squinting. "I've never seen that column." Paula stepped forward. "Those logs were preliminary, working drafts, not intended." A voice rose from near the wall. Miguel stepped into the projector light, hands clenched at his sides. Heads turned. A few people recognized him from old gate shifts and community events. "I wrote that column," he said. "Paula told me to." Paula froze. Miguel swallowed hard. "She called them problem trailers. Told me to prioritize addresses that were easy to ticket. And she said the board needed more revenue consistency." A wave of voices hit like surf breaking sharp questions. Angry mutters, someone swearing under their breath. Paula's face went pale under the projector glow. Miguel was terminated for misconduct. "He's a disgruntled former employee." "No," he said. "I quit because you told me to flag Cal's address before I even left the office." The room erupted again. A folding chair scraped loudly across the tile. Paula slammed a hand on the podium. "Order. This is all being blown out of proportion." Then a single sound cut through everything. A metallic beep from Jordan's phone. He didn't rush to check it. He unlocked the screen slowly, deliberately, so the room kept watching him. He read the message, then turned the phone around so the projector reflected off the glass. "It's from the clerk," he said. "Judge Merritt reviewed our filing." The treasurer grabbed his laptop from beside the podium, fingers trembling as he typed. "Let me check the bank portal. Maybe it's just a notice." He clicked, refreshed, clicked again. His chair scraped back as he stood. "Oh my God," he whispered. The screen at the front of the room flashed as he mirrored his display. A stark bank message appeared in bold letters, "Operating accounts seized." Court order. People gasped. A woman covered her mouth with both hands. Someone in the back shouted, "What does that mean?" Another yelled, "So our dues are frozen." The room churned with voices, questions, disbelief, anger. The treasurer looked helplessly at Paula. "We can't pay anyone. Not vendors, not contractors, nothing." Paula pressed a hand to her forehead. "This is absurd. This must be temporary." An older resident, gray hair, sun-creased skin. The kind of man who'd lived through more hurricanes than everyone else combined stood slowly from his chair. "They tried towing his beach house gear," he said, voice carrying over the chaos. "And now they can't even pay their own bills." The room roared. Some laughed in disbelief. Some shouted for Paula to resign. Others called for a full audit. The sound rose and fell like a storm tide. In the back, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed, Frank called out over the noise. "Well, looks like the court just towed you, Paula." The projector hummed, bathing the room in cold blue light as everything the HOA thought it controlled slipped out of their hands. The courtroom was colder than usual, the kind of cold that made the wooden benches feel like stone. People filled every row, residents, reporters, a few contractors who looked like they'd skipped lunch to be here. The seal of the county hung above the bench, catching the overhead lights with a dull shine. When the door behind the platform opened and Judge Merritt stepped in, the entire gallery went silent. Not quiet, silent. Nobody even shifted in their seat. Jordan leaned toward me. "Today," he murmured, "we proved they reached past their line." The bailiff called the docket. Boyd versus Seaside Dunes Homeowners Association. Paula sat at the HOA's table beside their attorney, rigid as a fence post. Her lips pressed into a thin line. The attorney, a man with slick hair and a folder thicker than necessary, stood as the judge took his seat. "Your Honor," he began, "the association acted in good faith. Our client believed they had enforcement authority based on long-standing community policies. Any towing attempts were undertaken with the sincere intention of preserving neighborhood standards." Jordan rose before the attorney could continue. "With respect, Your Honor," he said, "belief is not authority, and policies are not property rights." He walked to the evidence table and lifted a binder. "This is my client's deed. The parcel line is explicit. This strip where the HOA attempted to tow his beach house gear belongs to him alone. No easement, no common area, no shared right-of-way." He handed the deed to the clerk, then raised a second document. "And this is the plat map pulled from county records. Again, no HOA ownership, no ambiguity." Judge Merritt flipped through the documents with slow, deliberate movements. Jordan continued. "We also have testimony from Deputy Lawson, who responded to the towing attempt and requested proof of HOA authority." Lawson stood from the back row. Association produced nothing on site. "Your Honor," he said, "they couldn't show deed rights, easement rights, or any record tying that strip to HOA jurisdiction." A few residents nodded. Someone let out a low whistle. The HOA attorney straightened. "Deputy Enforcement Authority does not require ownership. It can extend from community standards that—" "It doesn't extend onto private property," Lawson said. "Not without a recorded right. And they had none." Judge Merritt looked toward the HOA table. "Counsel, do you have any document showing authority over the plaintiff's parcel?" The attorney hesitated. "Not at this time, Your Honor. However, we contend," Jordan stepped forward again, Additionally, he said we submit an internal email from HOA President Paula Green to her board. He lifted a printed copy. Quote, "Turn violations into revenue this Memorial weekend." And handwritten beside my client's address, "Problem Trailer." Gasps fluttered across the room. Miguel rose from the third row, clearing his throat. "That's my handwriting, Your Honor." She asked me to highlight targets, wanted towing fees up for the weekend. Paula stared straight ahead, jaw clenched so tight a muscle twitched near her ear. Jordan's voice stayed even. This wasn't good faith. This was overreach for profit. And the attempted towing of my client's beach house gear was the final act in a pattern. He stepped back, hands folded. Judge Merritt closed the binder with a quiet thud, but the sound cut through the room like a dropped hammer. "The evidence," he said, "is clear." Paula's attorney straightened, but the judge raised a hand for silence. "The motion to seize the Seaside Dunes HOA operating accounts," he said, voice echoing in the stillness, "is granted." A ripple of shock swept the gallery. Judge Merritt continued. "Furthermore, based on towing logs, internal emails, and sworn testimony, this court finds that the HOA acted beyond its property lines and without proper authority. As such, the association is liable for damages related to the attempted towing." Paula sank back into her chair. "Restitution is ordered," the judge said, "and until further notice, the HOA board will conduct a full re-election supervised by an independent administrator." Murmurs turned into whispers, whispers into small eruptions of disbelief. From the back row, Frank leaned forward and whispered just loud enough for me to hear. About time, someone marked the real line. The judge adjourned and the room erupted into conversation. Reporters surged down the aisle. Residents crowded around tables talking in quick, heated bursts about audits, elections, and overdue accountability. A young reporter stepped in front of me, recorder raised. "Mr. Boyd." "What now?" I met her eyes. My voice came out steady. "Now," I said, "they read the law before touching my gear." The flash of cameras lit up the polished wood as the courtroom fed on the moment justice finally landing where it should. The sun was barely over the water when I backed the truck down the boat ramp, tires whispering against the damp concrete. A thin mist hovered over the inlet, catching the light in soft ribbons. My trailer rolled steady behind me. No tow notice taped to the tongue, no cable marks, no threats hanging over it. Just my beach house gear exactly where it belonged. The skiff eased into the water with the familiar hollow splash rocking gently as it settled. I stepped onto the ramp, boots wet air, crisp and clean. For the first time in weeks, nothing felt off. Nothing felt watched. A gull screamed overhead, and I actually smiled. Later that morning, I stopped by the post office to mail a document Jordan wanted an original copy of. The bulletin board, usually cluttered with yard sales, lost pets, and someone trying to sell a barely working leaf blower, had 2 fresh notices pinned dead center, 80%. Vote, new enforcement rules approved. Half-month HOA dues. Credit effective next billing cycle. Someone had drawn a smiley face under the second one. Someone else had written "about time" beside it. I stood there for a moment reading both printouts twice, letting it all sink in. Rules rewritten. Dues credited. A board held accountable by the same community they'd tried to squeeze. A couple of residents walked in behind me. "You see the vote numbers?" one man asked his friend. "Landslide. Whole new slate of board members." "Good," the friend said, never trusting revenue sweeps again. When they noticed me, they both gave small nods, the kind men give when they don't want to get emotional but still want you to know they saw what happened. By noon, the smell of charcoal drifted down the street. Frank had dragged his old smoker into my front yard and declared it a quiet victory, BBQ. Folding chairs ringed the lawn. Coolers sat open. Someone put country music on low because anything louder felt wrong for the moment. Melissa handed me a plate stacked with ribs. Jordan texted, she said. He's in court on another case, but said, and I quote, "Tell Cal the system occasionally works when the evidence is loud enough." Frank cracked open a beer and lifted it toward me. To the guy who stood his ground, he said, "Finally, someone fought back." I raised my bottle. With an attorney and a court order that seized their operating accounts. That earned a few laughs. Miguel arrived last, wearing a clean button-down and carrying a small bakery box. "Got a new job," he said, cheeks red. "Different HOA. Better leadership. No more priority trailer lists." "Good for you," I said. "Good for all of us," he replied, glancing at the crowd. As the afternoon slipped by, a quiet kind of peace settled over everything. No shouting, no towing threats. Just neighbors talking like neighbors again. People swapped stories about the old board's habits, about how close they'd come to ignoring the revenue scheme altogether. The kind of talk that only comes after a storm passes. When the grill burned low and the sun dipped pink behind the dunes, I found myself staring at my trailer parked where it always sat on my land, framed by the soft amber of evening. The frame still had the scratch from the tow attempt. I'd decided not to buff it out. Not yet. Maybe not ever. A reminder of the line they crossed and the one I refused to step back from. Later, when the last of the plates were cleared and the streetlights buzzed awake, I hitched the trailer and headed down to the water again. The night was calm, the road empty. My reflection flickered across the truck window as I drove, the beach gear rattling softly behind me in the way it always had. As I eased down the ramp for the second time that day, I couldn't help the thought that rose up inside me, quiet, steady. True, one tow notice started it. One court order ended it. I stood on the edge of the ramp, watching the skiff float free under a sky streaked with the last gold of sunset. I didn't go looking for a fight, just kept my gear where it belonged.